the Great Depression, an economic crisis with global effects that lasted from about 1929 to 1939. The Depression was the result of a global stock market crash that started in late 1929 and ended in 1932. However, the Great Depression didn't affect the United States until towards the end of that stock market crash, in about 1932. These effects of the Depression lasted until the beginning of World War I. But what did the U.S. government do to try and combat the recession? What policies did they implement to get the U.S.'s economy to recover? The answer to both of these questions was the New Deal. The New Deal is a series of government acts, mostly the creation of new government agencies, that were put into place by Congress and President Franklin D. Roosevelt. These government acts were intended to solve the U.S.'s economic problems, the economic problems that came about due to the Depression, more specifically. These acts were put into place from 1933 to 1938, in two phases, the First and Second New Deal, which lasted from 1933 to 1934, and 1935 to 1938, respectively. The effects of the New Deal can be seen in the changes in GDP and the number of banks that closed yearly over the course of the Great Depression. First, despite the stock market crash in late 1929, the U.S.'s GDP didn't drop all that much in 1930, but GDP dropped a lot more in 1931, and dropped even further in 1932. In 1933, the U.S. reached an economic trough. As a result of the New Deal, the economy started to recover, with GDP rising steadily, but at a rather slow pace, from 1934 to 1937. Then, GDP dropped in 1938, but started to recover again in 1939. The recovery of the economy got much faster in 1940, due to the start of World War I. From 1941 to 1945, the U.S. economy started expanding, signifying the end of the Great Depression. In addition, the number of banks that closed in 1931 was much greater than the amount of banks that closed in the year prior. Likewise, the amount of banks that closed in 1933 was much greater than the amount of banks that closed in 1932. The effects of the New Deal can be seen in 1934, the same year that GDP began to recover, as the number of banks that closed dropped significantly that year, and continued to drop over the next couple years. The New Deal, in macroeconomics terms, was a form of expansionary fiscal policy, as the government was trying to increase private spending. However, the New Deal was only partially successful. The slow pace of economic recovery from the Great Depression, that is, up until World War I, shows that the New Deal wasn't so successful, at least not as successful as it was supposed to be. The use of expansionary monetary policy may have been a bit more successful. Yes, the inflation wouldn't be insignificant, but when nobody has money to begin with, it might not be a bad idea to put more money into the economy. On the other hand, it's tough to say if the expansion of the U.S. economy during World War I would have happened on the same scale without the New Deal. While the New Deal wasn't the most successful example of expansionary fiscal policy, at least taken on its own, it is, however, a great example of the government using expansionary fiscal policy to solve a serious economic problem. It also shows that measures taken by the government to help the economy don't always completely work. Nevertheless, the New Deal is one situation where the U.S. government tried to use expansionary fiscal policy to help the U.S. economy through an economic crisis. Thank you.